بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. And we begin today in our 56th episode from the book of Islamic fiqh. We begin a chapter that deals with inheritance. And inheritance is a very special and important branch of Islamic sciences of fiqh, due to the fact that it is so important that Allah Azza wa Jal took upon himself to explain and to divide the shares of the heirs when a deceased dies. Because if it were left to humans, they would have divided it according to their own whims and desires. And this is something that would not be at all productive or positive for humanity. And this is why Allah took upon himself to divide the inheritance. And the inheritance, or al-fara'id as it's known in Islamic fiqh, or ilmul mawarith, this is an important branch of science because not a lot of people know it. And those who know it don't know all the ins and outs of it, because it needs someone who's bright to understand this beautiful science. So al-fara'id comes from the root word farada, which means to assign or to obligate. And al-fard is something that is mandatory and an obligation. And this fard would be assigned to its recipient. And the inheritance means the rightful share due to an heir on the death of a relative. And when you first go to this science, you will find that there are a number of subtitles that are very important, such as the causes of inheritance, the things that block inheritance, the conditions of inheritance, the pillars of inheritance. All of these things a student of knowledge must be acquainted with, so that when he studies this beautiful science, he at least has a good idea. Now, I won't say that we will cover it thoroughly in our classes, but I will, inshallah, give you an idea about it so that it would be clear to you how it should be done and how, when to pursue this beautiful science, you will have the ability to understand it. So I'll just give you an introduction. With this introduction, you can read any book of inheritance and you will have a clear idea what you are going through and reading bi'idhnillahi azza wa jal. So what are the pillars of inheritance? There are three pillars. One, the one who is leaving the money or the wealth behind, which is known in Arabic as al-muwarrith, definitely the deceased. And the one who is the heir who's inheriting, and he's referred to as al-warith, and the money itself, the wealth, the property that is to be inherited. These are the three pillars. Now, what are the causes? What makes a person an heir? What are the causes of inheritance? How can we know that this person inherits or not? There are three types or three reasons for a person to inherit. One is marriage. So this is related to what? To the spouses. Once a marriage contract is conducted, if a man dies, his wife inherits him. If she dies, he inherits her. And when we say one of the causes or reasons of inheritance is marriage, this does not refer to living together or consummating the marriage. So even if only the marriage contract was conducted and it was authentic and accepted and valid, that's it. They become husband and wife and they would inherit. Example, a man proposed to a woman. Her guardian said, I give you my daughter in marriage. He said, I accept her marriage. And there are two male witnesses, Muslims, present. So now they are man and wife. The man travels straight to the country he works in. And after a year or two, he's supposed to come and consummate the marriage. But sadly, his plane crashes and he dies. So the woman was never ever alone with her husband. Yet she inherits him. And she is obliged to stay the period of iddah, which is 4 months and 10 days. So this is what is meant by marriage. The simple marriage contract, once conducted, khalas, they are man and wife and they inherit one another. The second cause of inheritance, the second cause of a person becoming an heir, is by blood relations, which is referred to as kinship, which can also be referred to in Arabic as an-nasab. And this refers to a person's parents, which we refer to as usul. So your father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, no matter how high they go, they are considered your usul, not the big da'wah organization center that we follow, which you see behind me on the banner, which has magnificent material for you all to make da'wah and to help you how to make da'wah. And it's all free of charge, not a penny from your side. All what you have to do is just click and visit their websites, Usul, and also the Islamicfiqh.net, and the hundreds of different platforms of da'wah in different languages, printed material, videos. This is not the usul I'm referring to in my class today. Usul means your lineage going up. Father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and so on. So these have a right in your wealth after you die. And then we have al-furu', the offspring. No matter how low they go, well, maybe low is not the appropriate word, no matter how down they descend. So you have your sons, daughters, grandsons and daughters, great-great-grandsons and daughters, and so on. Then we have what is known as Al-Hawashi, those who are not up and not down, but on the same level. And they are referred to as uncles, cousins, siblings above all. So your siblings are from the Hawashi. They are related to you, they're closest to you after your parents and your children, and so on. The third type of the causes, or what makes an heir, in the book they are referring to al-wala, and unfortunately they are referring to al-wala in one aspect which is disputed upon, and the vast majority of scholars say that it is not correct, and they do not uphold this to be a relationship. So what is meant by al-wala? In Islamic fiqh, the Prophet said alayhi sallam, al-wala'u liman a'taqa, and this is narrated or reported in a Sahih, when Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, once met Barira, and Barira was a slave woman, and she came to Aisha asking for charity, for help, because she wants to buy herself out from her masters. And this is a legitimate way of freeing a slave. When a slave goes to his master and says that I want my freedom, how much would you accept in money in order for you to set me free? He says, I like $1,000, but you have to bring the $1,000 within a year. So the slave goes and works, earns, and then brings the $1,000 to his master, and his master sets him free. So Barira went to Mother Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, and sought her assistance. So Aisha said, listen, I'll buy all of you. I will not give you an assistance. I'll buy all of you. Here's the money, but go check with your master first. So she went to her masters, and they said, yes, no problem, we accept, but your allegiance should be to us. So she went back, told Mother Aisha. Mother Aisha told the Prophet ﷺ about their condition, and the Prophet was outraged. He was angered by that. And he said to her, give her the money and let them set her free, and the allegiance would be yours. Because any condition that goes against the Book of Allah is invalid, even if it were 100 conditions. So from this hadith, and the Prophet said, al-wala'u liman a'taq. From this hadith, the Prophet said, allegiance is to the one who sets the slave free. Now, what do you mean by allegiance, Sheikh? It means that after I set my slave free, I am related to my slave in a way as if he's from my kinship, because he doesn't have parents, he doesn't have brothers and friends, etc. So if he were to die, I would inherit him. Now he's a free man, but who freed him? I did. So I have the allegiance of his in his life and also after his death. This is the verdict of the majority of scholars of fiqh, that the slave that I free, if he does not have of offspring, he doesn't have children, he doesn't have a family, he's like an orphan who we do not know whom he belongs to. In this case, once he dies, I inherit him because there is a bond of allegiance. Now, in our book, it seems that they have overlooked this fact and only mentioned the Hanafi point of view, which is if two men were to meet and one of them was a childish, not a childish, childless, yeah, he doesn't have a child, and he doesn't have anyone to inherit, so I come to you and said, listen, you are my brother, there is this allegiance between us, you are my wali and I'm your wali. Whenever one of us dies, the other inherits him, as if we are siblings, as if we are kinships. And this is applicable only in the Hanafi school of thought. The vast majority of scholars say that this is not applicable. This is not something you can donate or give or exchange with another. This is something that is mandated by the Qur'an and the Sunnah, either marriage or kinship or al-wala through the allegiance that comes after freeing a slave. Now again and again and again people would say, slavery, Sheikh, we have a problem with slavery. How come Islam supports slavery? We've said this a gazillion times. Islam rules over all, including our emotions, including our logic. Is there slavery in Islam? The answer is yes, of course. It's mentioned in the Qur'an. It's mentioned in the Sunnah. Oh, Islam is a racist religion, Sheikh. Why? Because it promotes slavery. Who said it promotes slavery? You just said it's in the Quran, it's in the Sunnah. I said it is in the Quran and in the Sunnah to tell us how to deal with the issue of slaves, but not that Islam promotes it. When Islam came 15 centuries ago, did the Jews support slavery? Did the Christians support slavery? Did the Byzantines, the Romans, the Persians, all nations on earth supported slavery? So was Islam against the norm? So you have to be realistic and fair. Okay, Sheikh, now we understood your point of view. 15 centuries ago, that was the norm, no problem. But what about today? Akhi, look at the roots of the problem. Look at the roots of the issue, and then we can go and discuss things logically. 15 centuries ago, it was chaos. I meet you while traveling, I put a rope round your neck, under gunpoint, take your wealth, and sell you as a slave of mine. I have children, I'm unable to feed them, I sell them as slaves. I have a debt, I cannot pay it off, the loan sharks come and take my children, and maybe take my siblings, and maybe take me for slaves. So slavery had no boundaries. It is the survival of the fittest. You're the strongest, you enslave others. And we can look at the recent 300, 400 years ago in the UK and in Europe, how they used to live, how the lords owned the land and the people that work on it. That was slavery. In Islam, Islam came, and Islam, when it came, it hit the ground running. So the first rulings were all types of slavery are prohibited, except one channel, and that is prisoners of war. And war is inevitable. This is how people exist, and this is what we see around us. Show me one country that does not wage war against others. Nowadays, in the West or in the East, everybody's attacking everybody else. relying on their whims and desires, relying on their hidden agenda, relying on their strategies and their greed. Islam doesn't have this. Islam only legitimizes war if it's defensive. You're attacking me, I'm going to attack you. I'm going to defend myself. Or in progressive jihad, when the Islam is flourishing and people are blocking it from reaching its people, this is when we give them the choice of Islam or paying the taxation or facing war. So what do we do when war takes place? We have prisoners of wars. What to do with them? The easiest thing is to execute them all, to kill them, deprive them of their lives. Why? Because we don't have jails. We don't have sufficient prisons. We don't have Guantanamo Bay. Yeah, but killing them is not this. Why would you kill women and children and innocent men who did not fight you? This is unfair. What to do? Well, this is the only source of slavery in Islam. You give this person, this individual, to a Muslim family, and they take him or her in as a member of the family, but to serve as a slave. And the vast majority of them would accept Islam. Did anybody force them? No. But the moment they're exposed to true Islam, they accept Islam. So the only means of slavery is prisoners of war. But there are tens of means that Islam encourages the Muslims to free the slaves they have. How is that possible, Sheikh? I'll tell you. One, the Prophet said, alayhi wasallam, whoever frees a male slave, Allah will free with each organ of that slave an organ of his from hellfire. Whoa, so if I free a man, I'll be freed from hellfire. That's plenty. That's a good bargain for me. Two, the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wassalam, whoever frees two women, Allah Azza wa Jal would free him in exchange. So if I free two slave women, my whole body is freed from hellfire. Okay, excellent. What else? Expiations. What do you mean? If I say, Wallahi, tomorrow I'm not gonna come to your house and eat biryani, and then I heard that the biryani your mother cooks is one of the best in town, so I have to expiate my oath in order to go and eat. What's the expiation? Feed 10 people, poor people, clothe them, or free a slave. Okay, slave is easiest. Go ahead, you're free. Expiation of killing someone by mistake. I was driving, I dozed off, I hit a man who was crossing the street or who was on the pavement. He died. I have to expiate. How to expiate? Free a slave. This is in the Qur'an. Remember a few lessons ago we spoke about zihar, when a man says to his wife, you are prohibited to me as my mother's back or my sister's back, meaning you are prohibited to have intercourse with, like it's prohibited for me to have it with my wife, with my mom, or with my sis. So now he wants to go back. What does he do? He does zihar. He does, expiation. By what? First one, tahrir raqaba. You have to free a slave. Then what? A man has intercourse during the daytime of Ramadan. What a sinful act. He broke his fasting. What to do? First thing, free a slave. And we can go on and on. So Islam encourages us to free slaves. And once they are freed, there is this bond between us. I wouldn't leave him die of poverty. His allegiance is to me, so I take him in. He's a free man. She's a free woman. Yet I take them in. We are related to one another. Now, having said all of that, these are the three types of conditions or the causes, that is, these are the three causes for inheritance: marriage, kinship, and al-wala, through freeing a slave. Now, are there any restrictions? Well, before we go to the restrictions, maybe one would ask, are there any conditions for inheriting? I said, yeah, of course. Can I just inherit from nowhere or out of thin air? No, definitely not. There are conditions. The first condition is that we are certain of the death of the person who we will inherit. What do you mean certain? See, I cannot inherit my father until he dies. And this is a very important condition. A lot of the folks nowadays send me questions saying, Sheikh, my father has property and he has wealth and he wants to distribute our wealth nowadays. He wants to distribute his wealth as inheritance. How is that? He's not dead yet. So he cannot distribute his wealth as inheritance. He can distribute it as a gift. And I get sons and daughters complaining that their fathers are not giving them from their inheritance. And I ask them, what inheritance do you mean? They say, from my father's wealth. I'm demanding that he gives me 10%. This is my share now, not after his death, and he's refusing. I said, subhanallah. The audacity that some of the children may reach because of their being undutiful, disobedient, and disrespectful to their parents. So definitely this is totally bogus and wrong. First condition, that we have to know that the person is deceased and dead before we can proceed with distributing the inheritance. How can we be certain? Either by seeing him, he's dead, he's a corpse, I've buried him, or the testimony of two male Muslim witnesses, yeah, we've buried so and so. Or by the widespread knowledge among everybody. So you ask anyone, did President so and so die? Is he dead? Is King so and so dead? And everybody knows, yes, he's dead and probably rotten. So this is condition number one. Condition number two is we are certain of the life of the heir when the deceased died. What do you mean, Sheikh? See, the pillars are to have a deceased, to have an heir, and to have the wealth. So now the condition of a person inheriting this deceased, we have to be certain that he was alive. And this clarifies the misconception that grandchildren have. Sheikh, my grandfather died and he had 4 sons. One of them was my father. But my father died 10 years ago. So now my uncles, the 3 sons of the deceased, who's my grandfather, are not willing to give us my father's share. I said, yes, this is correct. Your father has no share in the inheritance. Why, Sheikh? He was the son of my grandfather. True. But the conditions of inheritance, number 2, states that we have to be certain of the life of the heir when the deceased died. Because if the heir died before the deceased, he has no right. He's not there. So your grandfather was alive and your father was dead. So your grandfather inherited his son. Once he dies, his son is not any longer alive, hence he cannot be an heir, hence he cannot inherit, and that is why you, his children, cannot inherit your grandfather, because there is your uncles blocking you. And this is known as Al-Hajj. And we will come to mention that later, inshallah. So, condition 1, condition 2. The third condition is to know the reason of inheritance. So, yes, Abdullah died. We're certain of that. Ali is alive. Okay, we have 2 conditions now. Now, the third condition is important in relating Ali to Abdullah. I'm afraid they're not related. So what do you mean? Well, Abdullah is from a different family and Ali is from a different family. So how would you want them to inherit one another? They are neither married, alhamdulillah. They are not kinship to one another, and there is no wala between them, so they cannot inherit. The causes of inheritance are not there. So this third condition is important, to know whether he's legible to inherit or not. They may be cousins, but not always cousins inherit one another. Maybe there are people blocking this cousin from inheriting his cousin, and so on. So these are, in a nutshell, things that would expand your horizons, increase your knowledge. I am certain that now you have a greater understanding. Okay, now we know the causes, we know the conditions, and we know the things that are pillars in inheritance. What about the things that block the inheritance? This is our final issue. There are 3 things that block inheritance. What do you mean, Sheikh, block? I mean that if one of these things is present, you cannot inherit. You cannot inherit your father, your wife, your whatever, because of the presence of such a condition. So what are these things that block us from inheriting? Number 1, murder. What do you mean, Sheikh? If I murdered my wife, I cannot inherit her. And this is the consensus of all scholars. Anyone who kills a person cannot inherit him, if he is to inherit. So if I kill my father, I cannot inherit my father. Even if my father is a multi-billionaire, I cannot inherit a single dime. If I kill my son, the same thing. If I kill my anybody who's related to me. Okay, Sheikh, but we have murder which is intentional to kill, and we have mistakes, such as I was driving the car and my son was with me, or my father, and I was doing everything according to the book, but it so happened that I made a mistake. I dozed off. I had a flat tire and I was like 10 kilometers above speed limit. I could not control the car. The car rolled over. My father, my son died. I grieved for so long. I didn't intend to kill them. It never crossed my mind. I would never even dream of it. They are my loved ones. So, okay, we know that you did not intentionally kill them. So it's not murder. It's killing by mistake. However, the vast majority of scholars say that you are still a murderer, because the Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic hadith, a murderer takes nothing of the estate. He doesn't inherit. However, this is an issue of dispute. So some said the hadith is clear, a murderer, and this man is a murderer. Others said, yeah, a murderer who intends to kill. But this person did not have it even in his wildest dreams. This was unintentional. It's a mistake. That's why we do not ask or demand for beheading him, because it was a mistake. So it's a long dispute, but the most authentic opinion is that this person inherits like any other heir, except from the blood money. What do you mean, Sheikh? Due to the fact that I dozed a bit and caused the car to roll over, and my son or my father died because of this, then I am obliged to give blood money, which is the value of 100 camels, to the heirs of the deceased. I am one of the heirs, but I am excluded from the blood money, because this is a penalty and I cannot be involved in it. So it's given to my mom, my siblings, my this and that, who are legitimate heirs. I don't take anything of it. But everything else, I am like the other heirs. So I do inherit my father's estate, I do inherit my father's wealth, property, etc., but not the blood money that I had given as an expiation, as a diya for killing him by mistake. The second blockage comes from slavery. And in slavery, a slave does not possess, does not have his own wealth. And we spoke about that before in one of the classes. So if I see a slave riding his E63 AMG GTS and wearing a beautiful Rolex and has a nice Versace suit, and I'm interested, so I go to his master and say, how much would you sell me your slave? And he said, I'll sell him for you for $10,000. Wow, you're on. Here's the money. When I go in to collect the slave, I don't see the suit, I don't see the Rolex, and I don't see the fancy car. So I go to the master and say, Akhi, where is the belongings of the slave? He said, the slave doesn't own anything in Islam. This is not fair. This is what I bought. No, you bought the slave. I'll take you to court. Let's go. They go to the Muslim judge, and the Muslim judge says, yes, he's a slave. He does not possess anything. So if the slave dies and he has a free father or a free son who's not enslaved yet, they cannot inherit him, because all what belonged to him or all what he had actually belongs to the master. So this is the second reason for blocking the inheritance. Likewise, if the slave's father, who's a rich man, dies, this slave's son cannot inherit his father, because whatever he inherits would go directly to his master, and this is not the case and not permissible. Finally, the third reason for blocking inheritance is the difference of religion. The Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, a Muslim does not inherit from a disbeliever, nor does a disbeliever inherit from a Muslim. And this happens a lot with reverts. So a sister says, my father is a multi-billionaire and he's a Christian and he is on his dying bed and I'm a revert. Would I inherit him after he dies? I would say, are you married? Ha ha ha. No. Seriously. Would she inherit him? The answer is no. The hadith is crystal clear. Likewise, a brother comes to me and says, Sheikh, I'm a very rich man. I'm a Muslim. I'm a revert. My son is still a Christian or a Hindu. So if I die, can he inherit me? The answer is no. What about spouses? My wife is Christian. If I die, would she inherit me? The answer is no. And likewise, if she dies, I would not inherit her. So this is a crystal clear issue. Having said that, it is permissible to write a will. So if your Christian father writes in his will that I allocate 1/3 of my wealth to my Muslim daughter or to my Muslim son, there's no problem in that. Likewise, if a Muslim father dies leaving behind a will saying that 1/3 or 1/4 of my wealth goes to my Christian son or Hindu daughter, there is no problem in that, because writing a will is like a gift. It has nothing to do with inheritance. Inheritance has to do with the bond that is between you and the one inheriting you. And this bond has to have Islam in it. It cannot be among those who are not Muslims, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. I think we will take a break here and we will look at the questions as usual. So we have a question from Z Zubair, question number 61. He says, Sheikh, you talked about the pause after Al-Fatiha, that it is baseless. But what about this hadith? The hadith is narrated by Qatada, by Hassan, by Samurah, and he said, I think something like that, he says, narrated by Samurah ibn Jundub, I remember from the Prophet ﷺ 2 periods of silence, or 2 pauses of silence. Sa'id said, we asked Qatada, what are those 2 periods of silences? He said, 1 when he began his prayer, and 1 when he finished the recitation. Then added, when he finished reciting the closing verse of the Fatiha, not of those with غير مغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. And then brother Z Zubair says, This was graded as da'if by Sheikh Al-Albani in Sunan Abi Dawood 780 in the book of Hadith, etc. So, Akhi, Jazakallah khair. If this hadith was graded as da'if, as not authentic by Sheikh Al-Albani, then there's no point mentioning it. Ibn al-Qayyim in Zad al-Ma'ad mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ had only 2 pauses in Salat. The first pause is after the first inaugurational takbir. He would pause for a while, then he recites the Fatiha. The second pause was after finishing the recitation, not غير المغضوب عليه ولا الضالين, rather the surah afterwards, after finishing it, before going to takbir and ruku'. So Ibn al-Qayyim mentions that the first pause is for the inaugurational dua ul-istiftah. And in Sahih al-Imam Muslim, Abu Hurairah said, O Prophet of Allah, when you begin salat, what do you do when you pause before the Fatiha? And the Prophet said, alayhi salam, I thought, or I was hoping that no one would ask me about this except you, Abu Hurairah. I say, اللهم باعد بيني وبين خطاياي كما باعدت بين المشرق والمغرب ونقني من خطاياي كما ينقى الثوب الأبيض من الدنس, to the end of the hadith. So this is the first pause. We have no problem with that. The second pause, Ibn al-Qayyim says that after reading the surah, he takes his breath, and this was a pause. So he would go غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. Short pause, takes his breath, Allahu Akbar. But never ever reported that between غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين and the surah afterwards there was a pause sufficient and enough for people to recite the Fatiha, as we see in Al-Haram, as we see so many of the Imams do. This is not part of the Sunnah. Whoa, this seems to be the last question. I did not prepare for that. I thought that I had many more. So let me go back to I think Brother Hamdi had sent us something on the 2nd of July. Yeah. So Kareem says, what if woman is about 60 and she has no period? Does she need to wait 3 months as iddah as well? The answer is, if the iddah is from divorce, yes. If she does not have menses, if she's in her menopause period and she doesn't have menstruation, her iddah is 3 months, as mentioned in Surah Al-Talaq, as we have explained. But if she is a widow, then her iddah after her husband dies is 4 months and 10 days. David Brook says, Assalamu alaikum. Alaikum salam. I have a question to make, but it is about another topic. So my question is, what are the major steps, according to you, those we can follow them for becoming spreaders of Islam? I mean, even if I now study physics, so what are the steps and by what we have to start? Akhi, the Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic hadith, بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً, relay from me even one verse of the Qur'an. And he said, may Allah Azza wa Jal make the face of a person who hears what I say from hadith and takes it and gives it to other people to learn from it. For there is a possibility that those whom he's informing them about the hadith might be wiser and more comprehensive to it than the one who reported it to them. So it is a false statement to say that only those who have a degree can give da'wah or to speak about Islam. This is a false and blatant lie. You're studying physics? Good for you. It's not at all difficult to speak to a Christian about the oneness of Allah Azza wa Jal. And again, you can get all the information from Usul group, where you get the material you need to speak to an atheist, to a Christian, in their language, how to logic them. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to tell someone who's a Muslim, who's a sinner, that akhi, drinking wine is haram, intoxicants are haram in Islam. And this is the verse in the Qur'an. I don't have to be a scholar to do this. But when it comes to little issues, such as whether to place my hand on the chest or under my navel, maybe you need to have more knowledge, and this is not an issue of importance that would cause me to go out of my way to address it with a brother who may not be willing to listen to me. So you have to first of all try your level best to make da'wah, to call people according to the knowledge you have. Each one of us has a pay grade. There are certain topics that are definitely not in my league. So I would say, I don't know. This is too high for me. But when someone tells me what is the ruling on listening to music, Sheikh, what's the ruling on skipping salat, I have knowledge in this, I can give da'wah. Likewise you. Maybe someone comes to you and says, why is gold prohibited for men and not for women? You say, I don't know. And there's nothing wrong in saying, I don't know. But if he tells you, okay, is working in a bar permissible or not, you definitely know that answer is no. Because selling it, manufacturing it, carrying it, whatever, is totally prohibited. And this is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So you don't need, akhi, a lot of knowledge to spread the word of Islam, but you need to have the correct info without transgressing and saying or talking in things that you don't have knowledge in. Rashid says, I heard sometime before misyar marriage, what is it and is it halal or haram? Can you please explain on this? Well, this is a long topic, Rashid. Misyar marriage is a contemporary name given to a marriage where the wife wavers and gives up some of her rights. As a wife, she is entitled to a home, an appropriate home, allowance, food, electricity, expenditures for living, daily livings, for clothes. And if I'm married to another woman, she's entitled, this is her right, to have equal nights, dividing the time equally. This is a normal marriage. If a woman decides to waver, to let go, to pardon, to cancel some or all of her rights, this is up to her. And she has the choice to do that or to reverse it. The evidence is in the hadith of Aisha, in the hadith of Sauda, may Allah be pleased with her. And Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned this in the Qur'an. وَإِنْ امْرَأَةٌ خَافَتْ مِنْ بَعْلِهَا نُشُوزًا أَوْ إِعْرَاضًا فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا أَن يُصْلِحَا بَيْنَهُمَا صُلْحًا وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ. When a woman fears that her husband may rebel against her or abandon her, then there's no harm in reconciling between them, and reconciliation is good. Some scholars said that this was revealed due to the fact that Mother Sauda bint Zam'a, may Allah be pleased with her, and she is the Prophet's second wife. We know after Khadijah had died, Khawlah bint Hakeem As-Silmi, may Allah be pleased with her, went to the Prophet ﷺ and said to him, why don't you get married? So the Prophet said, who do you have in mind? She said, an old woman and a young woman. As for the old woman, Sauda bint Zam'a, who was married to his cousin, and her husband died. After both of them migrated to Abyssinia, while they were living there, they heard false news, or as he says, fake news. And they heard that Quraysh has accepted Islam and now it's a Muslim country. So they came back, only to find that this was only a hoax and not true. So her husband died and she was alone. Her father was a kafir, her brother was a kafir, she was the only Muslim. So the Prophet proposed and married her. She was his age. She was in her 50s when the Prophet married her, alayhi salatu wasalam. So after 10 years or so, after migrating to Medina, after being with the Prophet ﷺ, and then the Prophet married so many other women like Aisha, Hafsa, Zainab bint Khuzaymah, Zainab bint Jahsh, Habiba, Salama, Safiya, etc. She feared that the Prophet ﷺ might see her as an old woman and he may divorce her. The Prophet would never ever do such a thing, alayhi salatu wasalam. But this is her own feeling. So she came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, O Prophet of Allah, don't divorce me. I don't want anything from this dunya. I want to be resurrected on the Day of Judgment as one of your wives. So I give my night to Aisha because you love her most. And this is smart of Sauda. If she were to give her night to the Prophet ﷺ, he would be compelled to be equal and fair to all of his wives. So 1 week here and 1 week here and 1 week here, the night of Sauda. But now, by her giving her night to Aisha, this meant that the Prophet would go 2 nights to Aisha and 1 night to all the others, then 2 nights again to Aisha and 1 night to all the others. So she gave up her right in dividing the days and the nights as a wife. From this, the scholar said that misyar zawaj, marriage, is the same thing. And usually it has a noble cause. A woman who's a doctor and she works during the day and stays with her sick mother or sick father who do not have anyone else to take care of them. So she's getting old. She has her own natural needs and she cannot fulfill that by getting married to a normal person while being her parents' nurse and caregiver. So she finds that the best solution to stay away from haram is to marry someone who would not be forced to open a house or to spend and inject money. She's rich, she doesn't want his money. She wants his presence once or twice a week. And he doesn't have to spend the night. If they just have lunch together and have good time for a few hours and then he goes back to his wife and children, she's more than happy. with this, it is totally permissible and halal, inshaAllah Azza wa Jal, because this is the way of win-win situation, providing that the man is not someone who is just playing around, wiggling his tail like a bad dog. No, the man is unable to get married again financially, but he needs to get married. Or he knows that if he gets married, that his wife would take the children and demand divorce, and he needs a second wife. So this is halal, inshaAllah, but it is not something that is general to all. So you take it and say, oh, Sheikh says halal, let's go and look for a girl for a couple of months and divorce her and then get married again and for a couple of months. No, this is haram, totally haram. This is to be judged case by case scenario, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. And with this, we come to the end of today's lesson. Until we meet next Thursday, I leave you fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.